The plane touched down 3 hours earlier than scheduled, and Lisa couldn't have been happier. What was supposed to be a relaxing 2-week vacation in Italy had turned into a nightmare when her sister called with news that their father had been rushed to the hospital. Thankfully, it was just a minor heart episode, and he was already recovering well. But the scare had been enough to send Lisa packing her bags and booking the first flight home. As she sat in the back of the taxi, watching familiar landmarks blur, past the window, Lisa felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The vacation had been her first real break in over 2 years. Working as a freelance graphic designer meant she rarely took time off, and this trip was supposed to be her chance to recharge. Instead, she'd spent most of it worrying about family and checking her phone every few minutes for updates. The taxi turned onto Pine Valley Road, and Lisa felt her shoulders finally start to relax. Home was just minutes away now. She'd moved to this quiet suburban neighborhood 3 years ago, drawn by the peaceful atmosphere and the beautiful ranch-style homes that dotted the tree-lined streets. It wasn't the fanciest area, but it was hers, and after years of apartment living, having her own piece of land felt like a dream come true. Her house sat on nearly an acre at the end of a winding driveway, surrounded by tall oak trees that provided perfect privacy from the neighbors. Lisa had specifically chosen this property because of its secluded feel, even though it meant dealing with the local homeowners association and their endless rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. As the taxi pulled up to her driveway, Lisa immediately noticed something was wrong. 2 cars were parked in her circular driveway, a shiny black SUV and a dark blue minivan that she definitely didn't recognize. Her first thought was that maybe her neighbor Tom had asked some friends to use her driveway while she was away, but that seemed unlikely. Tom was respectful and would have asked permission first. Lisa paid the taxi driver and grabbed her suitcase, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The lights were on throughout her house, casting a warm glow through the windows in the gathering dusk. She could hear music playing and what sounded like children laughing and splashing in her backyard pool. Her heart started beating faster. This wasn't right. This wasn't right at all. She walked slowly up her own driveway, feeling like an intruder on her own property. The closer she got to the house, the clearer the sounds became. There were definitely children playing in her pool, and she could smell something cooking, barbecue maybe. The scent of grilled meat and charcoal drifted through the evening air. Lisa crept around the side of her house, staying in the shadows of the large oak tree near her kitchen window. What she saw through the glass made her stomach drop. A woman she recognized as Margaret Thompson, the president of their homeowners association, was standing at her kitchen stove, stirring something in a large pot. Margaret was wearing a casual sundress and had her graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking completely at home as she moved around Lisa's kitchen. Lisa had dealt with Margaret plenty of times over the past 3 years. The woman was notorious in the neighborhood for her strict enforcement of HOA rules and her habit of showing up unannounced to inspect properties for violations. She'd once issued Lisa a formal warning for leaving her garbage cans out 30 minutes past the designated pickup time. Margaret had a reputation for being difficult and overly involved in everyone's business, but this was beyond anything Lisa could have imagined. Through the kitchen window, Lisa could see into her living room, where a man she assumed was Margaret's husband was lounging in her favorite leather recliner watching her TV. 3 children, ranging in age from maybe 6 to 12, were running around the house in swimsuits, their wet footprints leaving trails on her hardwood floors. Lisa's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone to check the time. It was nearly 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening. These people weren't just visiting or checking on the house. They were living here. She could see children's toys scattered across her coffee table, beach towels draped over her dining room, chairs and what looked like suitcases stacked in the hallway. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what she was seeing. How long had they been here? How had they gotten in? She'd left her house secure with all the doors locked and her security system armed. She'd even asked her neighbor Tom to keep an eye on things while she was away. Lisa backed away from the window, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She needed to think clearly about this situation. Part of her wanted to storm through the front door and demand an explanation, but another part of her was genuinely frightened. This was so far beyond normal behavior that she wasn't sure how Margaret might react to being confronted. She walked back to her car, which was still parked at the end of the driveway, and sat in the driver's seat with the door open, trying to calm herself down and figure out what to do next. The rational part of her brain told her to call the police immediately, but she also knew that Margaret was well connected in the community and had a way of twisting situations to her advantage. Lisa pulled up her security app on her phone, hoping to see what had happened while she was away. To her dismay, the system showed as disarmed and had been offline for the past 4 days. Someone had deliberately disabled it, which meant they'd either had her access code or had found another way to shut it down. As she sat there in the growing darkness, watching lights glow warmly in her own home while strangers lived in it, Lisa felt a surge of anger rising up inside her. This was her house. She'd worked hard to afford it, had put her heart and soul into making it a home, and now Margaret Thompson had somehow decided she could just move her family in, like they owned the place. The sound of children's laughter drifted across the yard, again, and Lisa saw shadows moving past the windows as the family continued their evening routine in her space. They were using her dishes, sleeping in her beds, swimming in her pool, and eating food from her kitchen. The violation felt personal and invasive in a way that made her feel sick to her stomach. Lisa took a deep breath and steeled herself for what was about to be one of the most uncomfortable confrontations of her life. She wasn't sure what Margaret's explanation would be for this outrageous situation, but she was about to find out. She grabbed her house keys from her purse, locked her car, and walked up the driveway toward her own front door, preparing herself for whatever twisted justification Margaret Thompson might try to offer for essentially stealing her home while she was away. The familiar weight of her house key in her hand gave her a small measure of comfort as she approached the door. Whatever Margaret's reasoning might be, this was still Lisa's house and she had every right to enter it. She just hoped that the confrontation that was about to unfold wouldn't get too ugly, especially with children present. But one way or another, this family was going to have to leave her property tonight. Lisa's hand shook slightly as she inserted her key into the front door lock. The familiar click of the mechanism turning felt surreal under these circumstances. She was literally using her own key to enter her own home, yet somehow it felt like she was the one breaking in. She pushed the door open slowly, and the first thing that hit her was the smell. It wasn't the clean, slightly stale air she'd expected after being away for 5 days. Instead, her house smelled like a family had been living there. The scent of cooked meals, children's bath products, and that indefinable smell of occupied space. The sound of her door opening caused an immediate stir inside. She heard someone in the kitchen drop what sounded like a pot lid, and the children's chatter from the living room suddenly went quiet. "Hello?" Margaret's voice called out from the kitchen, and Lisa could hear footsteps approaching. "Who's there?" Lisa stepped fully into her own entryway and closed the door behind her. "It's Lisa," she called back, her voice sounding stronger than she felt. "The person who actually lives here." Margaret appeared in the hallway, wearing an apron that Lisa recognized as her own. The older woman's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like annoyance. "Lisa," Margaret said, her voice taking on an artificially bright tone. "You're back early. We weren't expecting you for another week." Lisa stared at her, in disbelief. Margaret was acting like this was some kind of planned arrangement, like Lisa was the one who had shown up unexpectedly. "We?" Lisa repeated, looking past Margaret toward the living room where she could see a man she recognized as Margaret's husband. Quickly muting the television, 3 children peeked around the corner at her with curious eyes. "Yes, well," Margaret said, smoothing down her apron nervously. "I sent you an email about this whole situation. Didn't you get it?" Lisa pulled out her phone and quickly checked her email. "I don't see any email from you, Margaret, and even if there was one, that doesn't explain why your entire family is living in my house." Margaret's expression shifted, and Lisa could see the woman's jaw tighten. "We're not living here," she said defensively. "We're house-sitting. There's a difference." "House-sitting?" Lisa's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "Nobody asked you to house-sit. I didn't even know you had my contact information, let alone permission to enter my home." By now, Margaret's husband had joined them in the hallway, looking deeply uncomfortable. The children hung back in the living room, sensing the tension even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. "Look," Margaret said, her tone becoming more aggressive. "As president of the Homeowners Association, I have certain responsibilities to this community. When properties sit empty for extended periods, they become targets for vandalism and break-ins. I was protecting your investment." Lisa felt her anger flare. "By moving your family in? By swimming in my pool and sleeping in my beds? That's not protecting anything. That's trespassing." Margaret's face flushed red, and her voice took on the sharp, authoritative tone that Lisa had heard her use at HOA meetings. "Don't you dare accuse me of trespassing. I have every right to ensure that abandoned properties in this neighborhood are properly maintained." Abandoned? Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I was gone for 5 days on vacation. That's hardly abandoning my property." 5 days that turned into who knows how long. Margaret shot back. "For all we knew, you could have decided to stay in Europe permanently. People do that, you know. And then what? Your house sits here empty, bringing down everyone's property values while it falls into disrepair." Lisa noticed that Margaret's husband was trying to catch his wife's attention, probably wanting her to stop talking, but Margaret was on a roll now. "Besides," Margaret continued, "your lawn was getting overgrown. Your mailbox was overflowing. It was obvious no one was taking care of the place. I did what any responsible neighbor would do." "A responsible neighbor would have called me," Lisa said through gritted teeth. "A responsible neighbor wouldn't break into someone's house and move their family in." "We didn't break in," Margaret said indignantly. "We used the spare key." Lisa felt her blood run cold. "What spare key?" Margaret seemed to realize she'd said too much because she hesitated for the first time since Lisa had arrived. The one under the flower pot by the back door." Lisa stared at her. "There is no spare key under any flower pot. I don't keep spare keys outside my house." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's husband cleared his throat nervously, and one of the children asked in a whisper if they were in trouble. "Well," Margaret said, her voice becoming defensive again, "however we got in isn't really the point. The point is that we've been taking excellent care of your property. We've watered your plants, we've kept the lawn mowed, we've made sure everything was secure." Lisa looked around her living room and could see clear evidence that this family had been making themselves completely at home. There were children's toys scattered everywhere, towels draped over her furniture, and she could see through to the kitchen where dishes were piled in the sink. "Taking care of my property?" Lisa repeated. "By using all my utilities, eating my food, and letting your kids treat my house like a playground?" "We replaced anything we used," Margaret said quickly, "and we were going to clean everything before you got back." "That's not the point." Lisa's voice finally cracked with frustration. "The point is that you had no right to be here at all. This is my house, Margaret. Mine. Not the HOA's, not the community's, mine." Margaret's expression hardened, and Lisa could see the woman's true colors starting to show. "Well, maybe if you were a more responsible homeowner, we wouldn't have had to step in." "Step in?" Lisa couldn't believe the audacity. "You didn't step in, you broke in and made yourselves at home." "We did not break in," Margaret insisted, her voice getting louder. "And I resent the implication that we're some kind of criminals. We are upstanding members of this community, and we were doing you a favor." Lisa noticed that the children were starting to look scared by the raised voices, and she felt bad for them. None of this was their fault. They were just caught in the middle of their grandmother's outrageous behavior. "Margaret," Lisa said, trying to lower her voice for the kids' sake, "I need you and your family to leave my house. Right now." Margaret's face went bright red and she drew herself up to her full height. "Excuse me, are you throwing us out?" "This is my house," Lisa said firmly. "You have no right to be here and I'm asking you to leave." "Well, I never," Margaret sputtered. "After everything we've done to help you, this is the thanks we get?" Lisa was about to respond when Margaret suddenly pulled out her phone with a dramatic flourish. "You know what?" Margaret said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I think we need to call the authorities about this situation. Someone is clearly not thinking straight here." Lisa watched in growing horror as Margaret began, dialing a number, and she realized that this confrontation was about to take a very different turn. Lisa watched in stunned silence as Margaret held her phone to her ear, waiting for someone to answer. The expression on Margaret's face had completely changed from defensive anger to something that looked almost theatrical, her eyes wide with fake fear, her voice taking on a trembling quality that Lisa had never heard before. "Yes, hello, I need help," Margaret said into the phone, her voice suddenly small and shaky. "I'm trapped in a house with someone who's acting very unstable and aggressive. She's threatening me and my family." Lisa felt her jaw drop. "What are you doing?" she whispered, but Margaret held up a hand to silence her while continuing her performance. "The address is 1247 Pine Valley Road," Margaret continued, her voice getting more panicked by the second. "Please hurry. I have 3 small children with me and this woman seems mentally disturbed. She broke into the house while we were here legally and now she's making threats." Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. Margaret was completely flipping the situation, making herself sound like the victim. Lisa started to speak up, but Margaret quickly moved away from her, heading toward the living room where her husband and children were watching the scene unfold. "Stay back," Margaret said loudly, clearly performing for the dispatcher. "Don't come any closer, kids. Get behind the couch and stay away from her." The 3 children, already confused and frightened by the raised voices, immediately followed. Their grandmother's instructions. The youngest one, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, started crying as Margaret continued her dramatic phone call. "She's approaching us now," Margaret continued, even though Lisa hadn't moved from where she was standing. "I don't know what she might do. We were just checking on this property for the homeowners association and she showed up acting crazy." Lisa felt like she was living in some kind of bizarre nightmare. She was standing in her own home, watching a woman she barely knew lied to emergency services while using her children as props in this twisted performance. Margaret's husband looked mortified by his wife's behavior. He kept opening his mouth like he wanted to say something, but then would glance at Margaret and stay quiet. Lisa could tell he knew this was wrong, but he wasn't going to contradict his wife in front of the children and a 911 dispatcher. "Yes, I'll stay on the line," Margaret said, then looked directly at Lisa with an expression that was pure malice. "The police are on their way," she announced. "Maybe they can talk some sense into you." Lisa pulled out her own phone, her hands shaking, with anger and disbelief. She needed to document what was happening here. She started recording, hoping to capture some evidence of Margaret's lies in case she needed it later. "Ma'am?" Margaret said back into her phone. "Yes, she's recording us now. I think she's trying to intimidate us. This is exactly the kind of unstable behavior I was talking about." Even recording on her phone was being twisted into evidence of Lisa's supposed mental instability. Lisa felt trapped in a situation that seemed to be spiraling completely out of control. "You're lying," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "I live here. This is my house. You broke in while I was on vacation." Margaret covered the phone with her hand and hissed at Lisa. "The police are going to see right through your story. Who's going to believe that a respected member of the community like me would break into someone's house?" That's when Lisa realized just how calculated this whole thing was. Margaret wasn't panicking or making desperate choices. She was executing a plan. She'd thought this through and was using her reputation and position in the community to make Lisa look like the unstable one. The sound of sirens in the distance made Lisa's stomach clench. She knew that first impressions would be everything. When the police arrived, and Margaret had already painted the picture for them, they were expecting to find a dangerous, mentally unstable woman threatening an innocent family. "They're almost here," Margaret announced, still speaking loudly enough for the dispatcher to hear. "Please hurry." Lisa looked around her own living room, seeing it through the eyes of the police officers who were about to arrive. They would see Margaret's family clearly settled in, with their belongings scattered around, looking like they belonged there. Then they would see Lisa, who had just arrived holding a suitcase and a phone, looking frazzled and upset. The sirens were getting closer now, and Lisa could see flashing lights beginning to reflect off her windows. Her heart was pounding so Hard, she thought it might explode. She'd never been in trouble with the police before, never even gotten a serious traffic ticket, and now she was about to be treated like a criminal in her own home. Margaret hung up her phone and immediately went into full victim mode, gathering the children around her and speaking to them in soothing tones. "It's okay, sweeties," she said loudly. "The nice police officers are here to help us. Just stay close to Grandma and Grandpa." The way she said Grandma and Grandpa made it clear she wanted the arriving officers to hear it. She was establishing herself as the protective grandmother, just trying to keep her grandchildren safe from the scary lady. Car doors slammed outside, and Lisa could hear heavy footsteps on her front porch. Her own front porch. This was insane. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by loud knocking. "Police, open up!" Margaret looked at Lisa expectantly, as if waiting for her to answer her own door. When Lisa hesitated for just a moment, trying to figure out how to handle this impossible situation, Margaret jumped up. "I'll get it," she announced, heading for the front door. "Officers, thank goodness you're here." Lisa watched Margaret open her front door to let the police into her own house. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. In the officers' eyes, Margaret was the one who belonged there, the one in control of the situation. 2 police officers stepped inside, and Lisa could immediately see them taking in the scene. One was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who'd seen it all. The younger officer looked like he was maybe in his late 20s, alert and serious. "Ma'am, are you the one who called?" the older officer asked Margaret. "Yes, officer," Margaret replied, her voice still shaky with fake emotion. "This woman broke into the house while my family and I were here. She's been acting very strange and making threats. I was so scared for my grandchildren." Both officers turned to look at Lisa, and she could see the suspicion in their eyes. She was still holding her suitcase in one hand and her phone in the other, and she realized she probably did look like someone who had just arrived rather than someone who lived there. "Ma'am," the younger officer said to Lisa, "can you put the phone down and step away from the family?" Lisa felt her world tilting. In a matter of minutes, Margaret had managed to completely flip reality. The police were treating Lisa like the intruder in her own home, while the actual intruders were being protected as victims. But Lisa wasn't going to give up without a fight. She had truth on her side, and she had evidence. She just had to stay calm long enough to present it properly. Lisa slowly placed her phone on the coffee table and set down her suitcase, trying to keep her movements calm and non-threatening. Every instinct told her to argue and defend herself immediately, but she could see the officers were already viewing her with suspicion, thanks to Margaret's performance. "Officers," Lisa said, keeping her voice as steady as possible. "I understand this looks confusing, but this is my house. I live here. I just came back early from a vacation and found this family living in my home." The younger officer, whose name tag read Rodriguez, exchanged a glance with his partner. "Ma'am, do you have any identification that shows this address?" Lisa nodded quickly and reached for her purse, moving slowly so they wouldn't think she was going for a weapon. She pulled out her driver's license and handed it to Officer Rodriguez. "Here's my license. The address matches." As Rodriguez examined her license, the older officer, whose badge said Williams, turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, you said you were here legally. Can you explain the nature of your presence in this home?" Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd pulled from somewhere, still playing the victim perfectly. "Officer Williams, I'm the president of our homeowners association. When properties sit empty for extended periods, they become security risks for the entire neighborhood. We were doing routine maintenance and security checks." "Security checks?" Lisa couldn't help but interrupt. "Your children are in swimsuits. You've been using my pool." "Ma'am, please let us handle the questions," Officer Williams said to Lisa, then turned back to Margaret. "How long have you been staying here?" "We weren't staying here," Margaret said quickly. "We were just checking on things more frequently because the property seemed abandoned. Sometimes that required overnight monitoring." Lisa watched in amazement as Margaret managed to make moving in with her entire family sound like a neighborhood security service. The woman was a master manipulator. Officer Rodriguez handed Lisa's license back to her. "The license does show this address," he told his partner. but that doesn't necessarily prove current residence. Lisa felt a surge of panic. What do you mean? This is my house. I have a mortgage here, I pay property taxes here, my name is on all the utilities. Anyone can get a fake ID with any address, Margaret said quietly, just loud enough for the officers to hear. And people who are having mental health episodes sometimes believe things that aren't true. Lisa stared at Margaret, in disbelief. The woman was now suggesting that Lisa was delusional and had somehow fabricated evidence of living in her own home. Officers, please, Lisa said, pulling out her phone again. I can show you my mortgage statements, my utility bills, everything. It's all on my phone. Officer Williams held up a hand. Ma'am, we'll get to that. But first, can you explain why this family's belongings are throughout the house if they just broke in? Lisa looked around and realized how bad it looked. Margaret's family had clearly been living there for days. Their clothes were in the bedrooms, their food was in the kitchen, their toys were everywhere. It looked like they belonged there. Because they've been here for days, Lisa said desperately. Look, I can prove this is my house. Check my security system app. She pulled up the app on her phone, but her heart sank when she saw it was still showing as offline. Someone disabled my security system, she explained, but it should show when it was turned off. Officer Rodriguez looked at the phone screen. It just shows the system is offline. That doesn't tell us when or who turned it off. Margaret's husband, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly cleared his throat. Both officers looked at him and Lisa could see he was struggling with something. Officers, he said quietly, I think there might be some confusion here. Margaret shot him a sharp look that could have cut glass. Robert, don't say anything. You're upset and not thinking, clearly. But Robert continued, ignoring his wife's warning glare. The thing is, we've been here since Sunday, and we didn't exactly get permission from anyone. The room went completely silent. Lisa felt a surge of hope, while Margaret looked like she wanted to strangle her husband. Robert, Margaret hissed. Stop talking. Officer Williams stepped closer to Robert. Sir, are you saying you've been staying in this house without permission from the owner? Robert looked at his wife, then at his grandchildren, then back at the officers. Lisa could see him wrestling with his conscience. Look, our daughter had to evacuate her apartment because of a gas leak. We were supposed to stay with her, but with nowhere to go and the kids needing a place to stay. Margaret said this house was empty and no one would mind. No one would mind, Officer Rodriguez repeated. Whose house did you think this was? Margaret jumped in quickly. Officers, my husband is confused. He's been under a lot of stress lately. What he means is that we were authorized by the HOA to monitor the property. But Lisa was already pulling up more evidence on her phone. Officers, look at this. Here are my bank statements showing mortgage payments to this address. Here are my utility bills. And look at this. Here's a photo I took of my living room before I left for vacation. She showed them a picture she'd taken for insurance purposes, showing her living room exactly as she'd left it. Clean, organized, and definitely without children's toys scattered everywhere. Officer Williams studied the photo and then looked around the current living room. This does show a significant difference in the condition of the room. And look, Lisa continued, getting more excited as she found more evidence. Here's my airline confirmation showing I was supposed to return next Tuesday, but I changed my flight because of a family emergency. I can show you the new boarding passes. She pulled up her airline app and showed them her original flight and the new one she'd booked just that morning. Officer Rodriguez was taking notes now. So you're saying you came home early from vacation and found this family in your house? Exactly, Lisa said. I was supposed to be gone for 2 weeks, but I came back after 5 days. Margaret was looking increasingly desperate. Officers, this woman is clearly having some kind of breakdown. People don't just break into houses and claim to live there. But ma'am, Officer Williams said to Margaret, you just heard your husband say you've been here since Sunday without permission, and this woman has provided multiple forms of identification and documentation showing this as her address. Lisa suddenly remembered something else. Officers, wait. I have video footage. She quickly opened her doorbell camera app on her phone. I have a smart doorbell that records everyone who comes and goes. It should show when they arrived. Her Hands were shaking as she navigated to the video history, praying that Margaret hadn't found a way to disable this system too. When the app loaded, Lisa nearly cried with relief. The videos were all there. "Look," she said, showing the officers her phone screen. "Here's Sunday afternoon. You can see Margaret and her family arriving with suitcases and bags, letting themselves in with what looks like... Is that a credit card?" The video clearly showed Margaret using something thin and flat to jimmy the front door lock, while her family waited with luggage and coolers. Officer Rodriguez watched the video twice. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, "this appears to show you breaking into this residence." Margaret's face went bright red. "That's not... The HOA has emergency access rights. Do you have documentation of those rights?" Officer Williams asked. Lisa watched as Margaret's entire story began to crumble, but she could tell the woman wasn't going to give up without one final desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation. Margaret's face was turning different shades of red as she fumbled through her purse, clearly searching for something that didn't exist. "I have the documentation right here somewhere," she muttered, pulling out receipts, tissues, and various papers. "The HOA board gave me emergency access authority for situations exactly like this." Officer Williams crossed his arms and waited patiently as Margaret continued her frantic search. Lisa could see sweat beading on the older woman's forehead despite the cool evening air coming through the open front door. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said gently, "while you're looking for that documentation, we need to address what we just saw in that video. It clearly shows you using what appears to be a credit card or similar object to open the front door lock. That was just..." Margaret stammered, still digging through her purse. "Sometimes the emergency key doesn't work properly, so we have to use alternative methods." Lisa couldn't help but shake her head. "Officers, there is no emergency key. I don't leave spare keys anywhere on my property." She broke in, plain and simple. Robert, Margaret's husband, was looking more uncomfortable by the minute. The three children had been quiet during most of this exchange, but Lisa could see they were getting scared and confused by all the adult tension. "Grandma," the youngest one whispered, tugging on Margaret's dress. "Are we in trouble?" Margaret's expression softened momentarily as she looked down at her grandchild, but then immediately hardened again when she turned back to the officers. "Officers, regardless of how we gained entry, the fact remains that this property was abandoned and becoming a neighborhood security risk. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to protect property values." Officer Williams sighed. "Ma'am, even if that were true, you can't just move into someone else's house without their permission. That's called trespassing, and potentially breaking and entering." "But she abandoned it," Margaret insisted, her voice getting shrill again. "She was gone with no indication of when she'd return." Lisa pulled up her phone again. "Officers, I can show you the out-of-office message I had on my email. It clearly stated I was on vacation until next Tuesday and would respond to messages when I returned." She showed them her email settings, which clearly indicated a temporary absence, not an abandonment of property. Officer Rodriguez was writing more notes in his pad. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, "can you show us this documentation you mentioned? The paperwork that gave you authority to enter this residence?" Margaret's searching became more frantic. "I know I have it here somewhere. Maybe it's in the car. Robert, check the car for those HOA papers." Robert looked at his wife with an expression that was half pity, half embarrassment. "Margaret, there are no papers. You know there are no papers." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children seemed to sense that something significant had just happened. "Robert!" Margaret snapped. "Don't say another word." But Robert had clearly reached his breaking point. "No, Margaret, this has gone too far. Officers, my wife doesn't have any special authority from the HOA to enter people's homes. She made that up." Officer Williams turned to face Robert directly. "Sir, are you saying that you and your family entered this residence without any legal authority to do so?" Robert nodded miserably. "Our daughter's apartment had a major plumbing leak and we were supposed to stay with her while it got fixed. But the repairs are taking longer than expected, and we didn't have anywhere else to go. Margaret said this house had been empty for days and suggested we stay here temporarily." "Temporarily?" Lisa interjected. You moved in completely. You unpacked clothes, stocked the refrigerator, used my pool, disabled my security system. We were going to clean everything before you got back," Robert said weakly. "We thought you'd be gone for 2 weeks." Margaret was glaring at her husband with pure fury. "Robert, stop talking immediately. You're making this worse." Officer Rodriguez looked up from his notes. "Ma'am, making false statements to police officers is also a crime. Are you admitting that you lied about having HOA authority to enter this residence?" Margaret's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish out of water. Lisa could almost see the woman's mind racing, trying to find another angle, another lie that might save her. This is all a misunderstanding," Margaret finally said. "We were trying to help. We were being good neighbors." "Good neighbors don't break into houses," Officer Williams said firmly. "They call the homeowner or they call the police if they're truly concerned about a property." Lisa felt a wave of relief washing over her as she watched the truth finally emerge. But she also felt bad for the children, who were clearly scared and confused by everything happening around them. "Officers," Lisa said, "I want them out of my house, but I don't want to traumatize the kids any more than necessary. They didn't choose this situation." Officer Rodriguez nodded appreciatively. "Ma'am, that's very understanding of you, but we do need to discuss what happens next." He turned to Margaret and Robert. "You'll need to gather your belongings and vacate the premises immediately. The homeowner has the right to file charges for trespassing, breaking and entering, and potentially theft of services for using utilities without permission." Margaret's face went pale. "Charges? But we didn't steal anything. We didn't damage anything." "Ma'am, using someone's home without permission is a crime, regardless of whether you damaged anything," Officer Williams explained. "And making false statements to emergency services is another serious offense." Lisa watched as the reality of the situation finally seemed to hit Margaret. All her bluster and manipulation had crumbled, and now she was facing real consequences for her actions. "How long do we have to get our things?" Robert asked quietly. "We'll give you 30 minutes to pack up and leave," Officer Rodriguez said. "One of us will stay to supervise and make sure everything goes smoothly." As Margaret's family began gathering their belongings, Lisa couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Relief that the truth had come out, anger at what she'd been put through, but also sadness for how this whole situation had unfolded. Officer Williams pulled Lisa aside. "Ma'am, you have the right to press charges if you want to. What they did was illegal regardless of their circumstances." Lisa thought about it for a moment, watching the children help pack their toys with confused expressions on their faces. "Can I think about it and let you know tomorrow? Right now I just want my house back." "Absolutely," Officer Williams said. "We'll file a report about tonight's incident either way. If you decide to press charges, you can contact the station." As Margaret's family finished packing, the older woman made one last attempt to save face. "This isn't over, Lisa. The HOA board will be hearing about your hostile behavior toward community members." Officer Rodriguez overheard this comment. "Ma'am, I'd strongly advise against making any threats right now. You're already in enough trouble." Margaret's mouth snapped shut, and she followed her family out to their cars without another word. As the police cars and Margaret's family finally drove away, Lisa stood in her own doorway, looking out at her peaceful neighborhood. The whole ordeal had lasted less than 2 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. She walked back into her house, finally alone in her own space again, and began the process of reclaiming her home from the strangest invasion she could have ever imagined.